listening to the Top Music Guitar Podcast, the show for guitar teachers to learn about the craft of teaching great guitar lessons that students love. If you're looking to start or expand your studio and make guitar teaching your full-time dream job, you've come to the right place. Each week, you'll get to hear from some of the top guitar teachers from around the globe and get their best tips and experiences so you too can build your own dream studio. I'm your host, Michael, and I've founded one of the top guitar schools in Australia, written a best-selling curriculum, and I mentor guitar teachers. I'm excited to share my expertise with you and the wisdom of all the experts we interview. Make sure to subscribe so you don't miss any future episodes. Let's get into it. Hello, ladies and gentlemen from all around the world. Welcome to the inaugural episode of the Top Music Guitar Podcast. I've got a really special guest to help us kick off the very first one. That's my good friend all the way over from England, Darryl Powis. Darryl, welcome to the podcast.
Hey, Michael. How you doing?
Good, thank you. So I met Darryl, I guess maybe 5 or 6 years ago at an international guitar teaching event. And he's been a good friend ever since. He's always got his finger on the pulse of modern guitar education techniques. And he's been an inspiration to my teaching and has come up with some fantastic ideas. He's the owner of the Guitar Tuition East London School, and he's doing some amazing things with his students over there. So, Darryl, welcome to the podcast.
Hi, Michael. Thank you.
So can you give us a brief overview of your story so far and your journey from transitioning as a guitar player in the local London scene playing in bands to being a studio owner with a thriving music school?
So I moved to London to be in a band when I was 20 years old. And, we got a house together. I'd been a teacher before I moved to London at someone else's school. And I'd end up kind of doing a lot more teaching there than I expected. At that time, when I was like 18, I was just kind of thrown into lessons and teaching. And I was like, oh, wow, I can kind of do this. Anyway, moved to London, going to make it with the band because, it's London and that's where everyone goes to make it. It's like London, LA, those kind of places. But what I discovered when I got to London is you have to pay rent and that's expensive. And so I got a job and I ended up basically in London, the hours that you work are so insane that it was almost impossible to do any music. Like I barely had time to keep up with the material for a gig, let alone do any practice. And so my playing just started going backwards and I started getting worse. And I remember I was sat there one day and I sold furniture was the last job I had before I started teaching again. I had a couple of jobs when I moved here, which are pretty crazy. Maybe that's a story for another time. But I sold furniture and I was sat there on the phones thinking, I just don't want to do this anymore. It was like 8 a.m. till 10 p.m. And it was during the really busy time of year where everyone moves into London. It's like this furniture company where everyone's going to move around. And it's their promise was next day furniture, right? It was so whatever someone made an order, it was like, oh, it has to be done. So you just end up staying really, really late. And there was no chance for any practice or any gigging. And I was just like, right, I'm handing my notice in. And I don't have a clue how I'm going to make any money. And so I quit. And it'd been like a year since I've been in London, I think. And I had £3,000 saved. And I was like, oh, this would be fine. And I didn't know what I was going to do. I was just like, I knew I wanted to do music. And so I was like, well, I'm going to figure this out. So I spent 6 months basically using that £3,000 to watch TV and take part in all sorts of things that didn't make me any money, which were like, I was in music videos but I was playing in bands again. I was playing for some kind of up and coming artists at the time. I was like actually being a musician for the first time in ages. I was making some money from it, but it was nowhere near like what I actually needed to pay any rent. It was like just keeping me afloat. And it wasn't until I was about $2,000 in debt that I was really like, wow, now this is make or break. It's either move in with mum and dad or like go back home, which I feel grateful that I had that opportunity, but that really wasn't an option. That was never going to happen. Or it was, okay, I really need to make something of this. And I'd already been teaching a bit at this point, but I decided that I was going to kind of go all in and it was something I was already good at. I think I was already a better teacher than I was a session musician or guitar player in bands. And the other thing is there's more of a market for people teaching than there was for session musicians. Like for people being paid as a session musician, there's a lot of competition. There's less people, there's more people who want to take and learn guitar. And so I started teaching more guitar, and I started kind of falling in love with the guitar teaching and what it allowed me to do. And I really loved teaching. On my first experience, both my parents were teachers at different points in their lives. My mom was a teacher for like 40, 50 years, something like that. And then my dad was a teacher later in life. And I never wanted to be a teacher because I saw them working in schools, but I really loved the process of helping people and educating people. And so it all fit for me. Like I was helping people have breakthroughs that I hadn't kind of ever. It's just so like rewarding. Like gigging's rewarding because you get the 30 minutes on stage after lots of traveling back and forth. And that's cool. But teaching can be rewarding. Like for me, every hour that I'm working with someone and they're having a breakthrough or they're doing the hard work and they're kind of seeing the process go through. And that's great. Like I think it was just going, oh, this is a cool thing that I can do. And I really kind of fell in love with teaching, the thing I said I never wanted to do or be. So that's kind of my story.
Oh, it's amazing how it happens. And I think it's really great that you had that, like, make or break point where you just really weren't liking the day job that you had. And a lot of teachers get stuck at that in the security of it. And that's where their plane goes, or, they fall out of a teaching and just stick with a job that builds that income. So was there anything particular that helped you overcome that like taking that plunge and becoming a teacher as opposed to quitting your job so you could go on to become a teacher and figure it out?
Yeah. So quitting the job originally, I mean, that was a real leap of faith, already going for it. And then I had a lot of experience from being involved in someone else's business. I have to say that was in that industry. So having seen what it was like to be inside someone else's business, there's stuff that I still do today that I learned back when I was 18 or 19 from just being involved in someone else's service-based business and music school. And so I'm really grateful to that kind of time. And then I had coaching too when I left, when I was already in debt. I was like, right, I'm going to get some coaching. I'm going to spend some more money. But I needed coaching at that point to get help with how to actually understand business at the same time. And I think that really helped me. And I think also I'd seen from being in someone else's business before that, like, to start a business, I had to invest in myself. Like I saw that, to make money, I had to kind of spend money. Was maybe not the best how I would think about it now, but it's kind of how I thought about it then. I was like, oh, well, you have to speculate to accumulate. You have to do things. So I was like, okay, well, it was a bit of a punt, and I got a bit lucky, and the stuff that I was doing worked. And so it started connecting dots, and it took a long time for everything to really come together in the way that we have now. I mean, we're talking, it's eight years ago now. But yeah, I think having some previous experience, and I'd done lots of sales jobs before too. They were selling furniture or other things. But I think having a bit of a sales background, having a bit of a involvement in someone else's business and kind of seeing how another music school looked, or having experience teaching other people's clients and seeing the mistakes that other people make, gave me confidence that I could do this. Like I had no questions around, could I teach guitar? Like that was never even a question mark for me. And I had no questions around, could I help customers? And then having some coaching for some of the business side things in terms of like how the marketing works and stuff like that, the three together, I think really enabled me to get things to click and start acquiring and keeping lovely students.
Yeah, I always say to people, like, musicians are renowned as putting 10,000 hours into getting their instrument up to scratch and learning all these amazing skills. And teachers will then invest another couple of thousand hours into becoming good teachers, but they never invest like, $30 in a weekend in a guide to personal finances or marketing or how to become, better business people. So would you say that's something, investing into the business training, the marketing, that's gave you kind of like that edge over the average guitar teacher in your area?
Yeah, I think so. Yeah, I think for sure. I think it's actually, funnily enough, it's the same way that I approached when I was playing as a gigging musician too, is like I knew that I was never kind of go back. I didn't start playing guitar till I was 15. I played other instruments when I was a kid, but I didn't start playing guitar till I was 15. And I felt like with the guitar, I knew within like 6 months that this is what I wanted to do. I remember trying to convince my parents to let me quit school and go straight to study music at college. And they were like, whoa, let's slow down here. And they didn't let me do that. They suggested that I kind of take a music course at my school, which was fine. And I think probably in hindsight was the right idea. But I was really obsessed with this instrument, but I knew that if I wanted to be a musician or a guitar player, I was never going to be the best at that time. It would take a long time for me to be the best player. I could be something better at other things, but I was never going to be the best player. But what I saw was like, whenever I worked with musicians, is I could just be if I could be the most organized, the nicest guy in the room, the most prepared with the songs and the material and kind of knowing everything. If I practiced lots and I took everything a bit more seriously than everyone else, I would get more gigs. And I became like, I got gigs that I just should never have ended up getting. Like looking back, like I really, now I'm quite a good guitar player. Like I really think I back myself as a player a lot more than back then. But then I was a kid who I did not play very well, but I would learn songs really, really well. And I would turn up to these gigs for musicians where I remember this lovely girl who's gone on to do really well. What got me the gig was I was the only guitar player. She'd auditioned all these guitar players who were like really good guitar players. And she was from a music uni. But what they'd all done was gone and listened to her songs, kind of had taken chord charts down, and then they'd completely changed her songs. I was the only person who turned up having done both. I had my versions, and then wrote exactly all of the guitar parts from her thing. And she was just like, "Oh, it's you, because you learned all the songs perfectly." And I was like, "Yeah, of course. Well, why would I assume that I can do it better than the artist?" I think I took that same approach to business or thinking about the teaching of the business, where it's not like you have to learn all the parts equally. So you have the teaching part of it, but you only get to teach people if you have students coming in. And so you have to learn the business part of it. And so you have to invest in learning that part of it. And if you can just be a little bit more diligent than the other people's options that they have, then you'll be a good teacher. And actually, really, it isn't even about your local competition or competition around the world. It's just about doing a really good job with good people. And if you can do a good job and learn what that means and do good marketing and learn what that means, because it's enough to say, oh, this is good marketing, and everyone has an idea of what they think good business is. A bit like the X Factor, where everyone kind of has an opinion on what a good singer is and what a good musician is, but like people don't really know. You have to go study those things. You have to invest in yourself. You back yourself. And then you'll find that when you start doing the principles and you start learning, like things start clicking and they start coming together. So I know it's a very long answer, but the answer is yes. I really do think people should back themselves to invest themselves and to learn. And it doesn't mean that every single thing that they ever learn is going to come off and happen right away. But sometimes you can just get that magic piece of advice, and it can be the difference of an extra 10 students over the next few months or years. And when you're starting out, that's like life-changing as well. So, yeah.
That's it. And just to add on to what you said there, like the momentum you get from, getting a little bit further ahead, it's like that positive feedback loop. Once you get a little bit further ahead, you get 10 more students, and then teaching those 10 students feeds into your experience. And then you grow and you become better. And then that creates more momentum, more hype around you. And it just keeps on getting better and better. And, you hopefully become unstoppable. And then, whatever it is you put your mind to, you just get the advantage of all the knowledge you've accumulated. But speaking of all that, so when I look at you on Instagram, I see you doing some really, really amazing things with your students and at your school. So can you tell us what you are doing at your studio to give that wow factor to your students, to your clients, and obviously everyone watching on social media?
That's a good question. So I think about what we do as really the whole focus is trying to transcend the idea of guitar lessons, because I don't think anyone really wants to buy guitar lessons. That's what they search for. But what people are kind of crying out for is a transformation. It's their story. They are at some stuck point in it, and they're looking for someone to help them overcome that point that they're at right now. So what I really think about my role in that is trying to create an environment, a culture, a school community where it's normal. It's like normalized for people to come in as a beginner and then a few years later record an album or release a song. And it's like last year we had like 6 students release songs, and these are not like average songs. These were like really well produced, and we had a couple of music videos come out. And these are students who started as complete beginners. And so the focus of everything for us is like trying to find ways for them to grow. And we're just kind of the facilitators of that. It's like, and we're part of their journey in their musical career. And I think that for us, a lot of my students are adults. Like we have a lot of really good kid students too, but a lot of my students are adults. I think it's just part of the demographic of where we are as well in London. But we have a lot of people who, they had a dream to play as a kid, and then, life gets in the way. And now they're ready to kind of really go for it again. And we get them playing in bands, we get them performing, and everything in between. So the releasing a song, that's kind of on the extreme ends of what happens. But there's it really is very normal that someone comes in and is playing in a band within not very long of starting their instrument and then performing. And everything that we do is kind of designed around facilitating that to happen. It's like making the connections between band members, getting them to play, getting them to perform at their first gig, helping them through that, helping them with song choice, getting them playing in time so they're kind of tight with when they play with the drummer. We get them playing with drummers too and stuff like that. So yeah, I mean, that's what I feel like that's what makes us stand out, is like we're not really selling guitar lessons. We're helping people who really want to actually do stuff with the guitar. So we're getting them out of that bedroom where they're confused on Fender play or wherever the hell they're actually trying to learn from. And we're going, okay, well, you didn't start to play in your bedroom, and what you started is because you saw someone at a party play and you were like, oh, I wish I could do that. And so we get it so they can do that. Or they watched the kids through the window jamming at school when they were like 15, and now they're 35, and they still kind of just wish they could join in with that. And now we get them playing and joining in, not with 15-year-old kids, I'll admit, but with other 35-year-old or adults. But that's what I see as our role. And that's, we just focus on the students we've got, trying to give them the best transformation and experience for their guitar playing that we can.
That's absolutely amazing. And I really love that bold statement of, we're transcending guitar lessons and creating those amazing experiences. And it obviously leads to something so much better than the norm, which is come in for 30 minutes, let's try and learn a song, thanks very much, see you next week, to creating this experience, which, as you said, is, shaping their lives and helping them tick off these goals and dreams which they've always wanted to do. So that's absolutely amazing. Would you have any advice for other teachers looking to do more with their live performances with students and run showcases and events like the open mics that you guys are doing?
Yeah. I always think with every event that I have ever put on, I always wish I'd done it earlier, because you have to suck at something. I'm a bit of a perfectionist, but I also think that musicians in general are perfectionists. It's kind of how we're taught to learn. We're taught that, you have to nail things. And I remember whenever you do a gig as a musician, it's like every wrong note, most of the time, you feel it really hard. Or if you've ever done graded exams or exams for music and you've received like a marking of your performance, pretty demoralizing sometimes, or it cannot be. But even if it isn't demoralizing and you got a great mark too, then that means that you kind of went for perfection on everything. And I'm not convinced of the healthiness of that in music as a culture. And that's one thing. But in business especially, and in your own learning, just as a whole thing, and that's the hard thing about this, is obviously business is learning, and it's you that has to learn. The important thing that has to happen is you have to gather data by learning. So I always think like if you feel like you're even on the cusp of being able to do one of those events or something, just do it. And that's the thing for me is like what I found was whenever you start it, it's going to be kind of not very good for a while. And then it builds up with as you learn how to do it and how that event looks. So I remember, I think our first ever open mic had 8 people show up. And I mean 8 people. And I think a few of those performed. And then I was like, okay, what are we going to do now, guys? So we jammed. And that was like one of our big ones. And then now we've had events, we had like 150 people show up and 25, 30 performers come for an open mic where it's like, I don't know who's coming. And I'm just taking a list at the beginning going like, right, well, we've got 3 hours. So we better get started. And they sometimes overrun. And then now I'm also doing these kind of more evening ones. This is a new development. So this is where I'm doing something which is I'm learning again. So we've always done those for years. I think 5 years now I've done the Saturday ones, and that's where they get really busy. It's a weekend one where families come and it's really kind of cool. But now I've started doing these weekday evening ones, which are more regular. They're every month. And at that, I mean, sometimes it's quiet. We did one in Jan and I was like, wow, this is really quiet. And I filled the space. So I'm playing if there aren't enough performance because it's 3 hours of things. So it's a gig for me too. But that's one of those things where it's like, we've done 4 of them, and I'm just learning again. So I tend to commit. If I think something's worth doing, and I want to learn to do it, I will tend to commit for a minimum of 2 years to myself for doing it. If I don't think it's worth doing, then I won't make that kind of commitment. But in this case, I go like, oh, I want a gig. I think this is a cool thing that students are going to get used to and use, and we'll get more people coming to. But we've had a couple of times where the whole room has been full of students wanting to watch, but only like 3 or 4 performers. So I'm ending up doing like an hour and a half of playing myself, which is great practice for me as well. And just an opportunity to connect with students. And also we invite prospects down to come hang out and meet me and see what we're all about and meet our students and stuff. So
it all sounds amazing. And just pulling out the fact that you said when you want to give something a go and you believe in it, you actually commit 2 years to trying to implement it or make it happen or learn as much as you can. I think a lot of people can really learn from that because so many people give up way too early on in the process. And if we as teachers are upset when our students quit after a very short amount of time, which we deem isn't long enough for them to have developed a reasonable amount of skill, then we too need to model the behavior that we want them to show by, committing to whatever it is. So I think that's something all the listeners can learn from there, Darryl. And obviously it sounds like you've got this awesome community around your school, like 150 people come to an open mic night. That's just like, I don't think I've ever been to such a big open mic night. They're always in these like dingy little pubs with, like 30 people there, and half the audience is just everyone's girlfriend or wife. So to get that many people is absolutely amazing. So yeah, how important is building a sense of community around your school, and what have you done to facilitate that on top of what you've already mentioned with just having these gigs?
That's a good question. I think the community is so important because it's like the feeling that everyone gets when they come into the school. It's the vibe. It's more than just the teachers and the staff. The community is like obviously your marketing it tells people like, is this good? And they get to make an assessment decision. But when people kind of start or they come in, that community is do I want to stay? Is this something I identify and do I want to be part of? And so I think that, this is why I have a lot of thoughts about, I absolutely think competition exists in the world between industries. And I do think obviously I think it's so elastic in terms of like how you don't have to worry about your competition, because all you have to do is focus on being you and being the best you that you can, and your school being the best school that it can. And you will attract people who are like that. I think that basically anything you can do to build that community is so important. And the people that are going to be in that community, I think my clients, some of them become like my best friends, honestly. Like we have some clients that have been with us for a few years. We have them around for dinner, and a lot of those students, when the new ones come in, they're like looking around, talking to other people in that community. And so anything you can do to build that community vibe is so helpful. One of the things that I got when I had my first job at someone else's music school was like, it was like day one. My job was like, it was mad. My job was doing everything at the time, but it was so stressful. But it was basically taking all payments, which were every 5 or 10 sessions or something, and had to be done by cash or card. There were half an hour lessons. So it was like every half an hour taking those payments, making teas for every single person that came into the room. And also there was 2 floors of retail that I was running at the same time, and dealing with, often if a teacher hadn't shown up for lessons, I'd end up taking their day of schedule and genuinely trying to do those things at once. So sometimes I'd be trying to teach a lesson and sell a guitar upstairs at the same time, which was insane. But the thing that was like highest priority of all of those in their minds was the making teas for parents and customers. That was the most important thing of all. And I just didn't get it originally. And then I did get it. I was like, oh, so because in this case, the parents of the customer, they're sat in the waiting room, the kids in the lesson, and they want to have a nice time while they're here, and they're going to sit and chat and have a bit of community. And so that was that, like, I remember that being like a little bit of a spark in my head. I was like, oh, if you've got kids, like the parents, the customer, because they're the one actually buying. And so we need to take care of them. And so probably the simplest thing to ever do is to free teas, coffees, drinks for those parents is like an absolute must. And then making it like a thing where you know, everyone goes out and has a coffee between lessons, or we hang out and we have a chat and we have a tea. And I know that's very British, where it's like everyone bonds over hot drinks in this country, but you got to find some way. Like you need those water cooler. This is a water cooler moment, a thing in Australia. Water cooler moments like in the office where everyone goes to the water cooler and they're like chatting about something from their world. But you need those like interactions between yourself and customers. And you need to like your customers, frankly. If you don't, then that's a problem. But you need those like chatty, hey, how you doing, hanging out type things. I think that builds community more than probably anything else. And then the other thing is events. Like you need events where people are coming along to hang out and not just take a guitar lesson, whether that's a jam session, we used to do a board game night pre-COVID. Like we used to do a once a month or once every few months, we do a board game night. And it's not everyone that comes, but there's a whole bunch of people that come and they're like, it's just so much fun. It's just a chance to hang out. We used to do Mario Kart night. That was another one. I haven't done that in a few years. Mario and karaoke night. It's just, you know, like things like that.
Yeah, things like that are really, really important for kids and adults. And I have to say, like, it's the most British thing ever hearing you talk about just getting everyone tea and helping them bond, most definitely. But yeah, it couldn't be truer. And things like, I know we've done bowling nights and we're always talking about like, doing like a Minecraft night or something, teachers versus students. We have a lot of kids who love playing that sort of stuff. I'll save a funny story about Minecraft for another podcast, but it sounds like you've got some really, really cool stuff going on there. And if I could just add one thing, I think the most important or most expensive chairs you should have in your studio are for the waiting area where your parents are going to be sitting. So you definitely want to take care of them. If they're going to be sitting around for an hour, you want to make sure they're on good chairs and just in an environment conducive to, you know, long-term retention and having a great time. And as you said, you know, the parents are the customers at the end of the day, not necessarily just the kids. Now, when I don't know if it was first met you, but early on, I remember seeing you give a presentation on something called deep practice. And so many guitar teachers, I think, have this fault of they just tell their students what to practice and never show them how to practice. And it's just, do that more, do that more, do that more. But unless they're actually showing them what to do and how to make improvements, then they're only just reinforcing the problem that they already have even stronger. Can you tell us more about deep practice and, you know, how you've used it in your own playing and how you use it with your students?
Deep practice is fascinating. And it's also, so I think everyone's heard of now everyone's kind of heard of that 10,000 hour rule, and a little bit of history on the 10,000 hour rule. It's not a rule. That was coined by Malcolm Gladwell in his book Outliers, which is kind of where it was made famous. And it was no slight on Malcolm Gladwell. He's got some amazing books. But according to the guy who we pulled that study from, it's a little bit contentious to call it the 10,000 hour rule. It's just a nice round number that everyone likes to kind of talk about. And it was kind of journalistic, is what I'm saying, the 10,000 hour rule. But what's interesting about it is it's made it famous. And the guy who did that study, called Anders Ericsson, is the person who actually studied all these musicians and kind of looked at, and basically the thing was, he plucked out that, on average, really, really high level people who go on to be master musicians had, I think by the age of 21, done 10,000 hours. But the contention is by the age of 18, they'd done something like 6,000 hours or 7,000 hours. I mean, he's like, why didn't you choose that number? And then the important point is they never stop. It's not like 10,000 hours and done. And that's kind of the way that it's always been used, is, wow, how am I going to get my 10,000 hours? And so that's where the beginnings of people looking into, well, what kind of work they're doing. So it's not 10,000 hours of just work. It's 10,000 hours of what kind of practice. And that kind of practice, the way that it looks is it tends to be for those people in that study with the outcomes that they had, where they were, and these I think these were conservatory musicians from memory, was that they were doing on average about 4 hours a day of practice, which is less than people normally expect. The bit that no one ever talks about is they were all having 8 hours of sleep every night. And that's really important. That's probably as or more important than the 4 hours, because their brains were being able to recover from the type of practice they did. The type of practice they did was quite uncomfortable. And it's been coined as deep practice. It's been called the ugly zone. In traditional music education, this isn't new. This is a thing that my mum, I remember when she was learning about teaching, they used to call I think it was the zone of proximal learning. As in formal education, everything needs an enormous name that no one can understand. I like the ugly zone the most, I think. But it's talking of the quality of that practice. And the point that it was making, the point that deep practice is talked about, and there's infinite books. And so every talent book that you look at now will now talk about deep practice. Cal Newport has done a spin on it for a book called Deep Work. Everyone's like deep everything. And basically what it is, it's doing challenging things with a specific goal to move your playing from one area to the other. So in my own practice, obviously as a musician, if you want to improve, it's the absolute gold standard of being able to practice and improve on your instrument. And it's why people tend to get stuck in ruts of playing and not practicing. So deep practice normally takes the form of having a specific outcome that you're looking for, a specific strategy to practice it. And it's normally with a coach. It's normally with someone telling you what to do. So even when it can be that sometimes you can get this on your own, but normally you need someone to literally sit with you and go, this is what you're doing. Even the experts. So this is like top athletes, everyone doing it, and especially the experts, of course. It's like, here's the specific outcome. Here's what you're going to do to do the work. And then here's the strategies we're going to apply. And the important part about deep practice is we're trying to build, and as a teacher, you're trying to help the student. And as a person doing, you're trying to build mental structures in your head that towards the goal that you're heading towards. So someone who's really, really good at doing something has this whole mental structure that's built up in their head. And when you see like virtuoso musicians talk about stuff, sometimes it sounds completely insane, the words they're saying. But to them, it makes perfect sense because it comes from a mental structure that they have. So, when you see them and they're like, oh yeah, and then, and these two notes have a kind of nutty feel. I'm joking, but they do something, and it's all this mental structure they built in their head of like how these things sound, how they feel to them, how it makes sense. And to them, it makes perfect sense. And you hear them play and you're like, wow, that's cool. And people go like, wow, I'm going to search for the nutty feel. And it's like, that's like describing the spire on top of their mental structure when it's like you maybe are working on foundations right now, or we need to talk about how the concrete goes together and stuff like that. And so this is where sometimes people who are really good players are not good teachers. But what we're looking for is mental models. And with students, when we're trying to help them, we're trying to help students build mental models that they can work towards. And then we're trying to help them get comfortable with actually doing the difficult work of working on that stuff. So that's my theory on deep practice. Whether deep practice is what you should immediately be doing with any of your students, I think is a different matter. I think that deep practice is like a luxury when you first got people, and the first thing they need to do is build a habit of just picking up the guitar and falling in love with the instrument. But then deep practice is how we make that transformation become real. It's how you get people to really get good. And so, I mean, I'm not a virtuoso musician. I, by no means do I think I'm one of these master players. I think I'm getting better, and I'm a really good musician. But especially for anyone that I'm helping, I think I can have a really big impact with their playing, with micro amounts of getting this deep practice in. If they can do 20, 30 minutes of deep practice a day, that's transformative for them, and it gets them playing in bands, gets them having the experiences that they really want quite quickly, as compared to if they were, on Fender Play or something. Not that I'm hating on Fender. I have Fender guitars all around me here. But.
Yeah, and there's obviously just this huge component of practicing and a lack of awareness around it, which beginner students, there's just such a wealth of resources out there right now. Anyone on YouTube can become a teacher if they have a camera. With the whole COVID thing happening, a whole bunch of people who are great players just all of a sudden became teachers out of necessity. It's really hard for the uneducated student to really know where the good material source stuff is coming from. So I found that there is such a huge lack of, or the students just have such confusion about what is good, what is bad, and just try and pick up weights that are essentially too heavy for them. It's like they go to the gym on their first day and try and bench press 100 kilos by doing songs with bar chords and things like that. And that's leading into this idea of you've got this really structured form of practice, and it's just so different to what everyone expects or thinks about. Did you find from experience that if you tried too early on, you were scaring students off, or coming too hard too early in the process?
It's a good question. I don't have any memory of that happening as like a specific memory now, but I think yes is the answer. But that's part of my journey as a teacher. It's like you have to get better, and so I think I'm a really good teacher. I like of guitar and of some other things, but of guitar specifically, I think I'm a really good teacher. But there was a time where I was learning, and I'm still learning, obviously, but especially I think I kind of put things on a bit too thick and heavy at the beginning. And also I made the mistake in the beginning of expecting that my aspirations and goals should become their aspirations and goals. And so, if I want to do 4 hours of deep practice a day and get really, really good at guitar, or have these experiences playing professionally and touring, I would make the mistake, now I think it's quite naive, of thinking my students should have those same goals and that's what they want to do. And that it's just not the case. There are students who are like that and do want to do those things, and there's other people who might deep down really want to do those things, but you have to meet them where they're at because they might not believe any of that's possible. So you have with students, you have this kind of, you have to help them believe what's possible. You have to also help them believe in you, right? And so you can't come on too, like if you come on a bit too strong at the beginning, you just sound crazy. Like in week one, there's very rarely, unless someone was already really like far along in lots of ways, I tell someone about deep practice on week one of their playing, but most of the time it's just not even relevant at that point. They have to believe in kind of themselves, and they have to believe in us and what we're doing with them in order for them to kind of grow in confidence. And the more confidence you have and the more motivation you have, the easier it is to do deep practice. The thing about hard things is that in order to do hard things regularly, your motivation and ability have to be quite high. So in the beginning, if they don't have a lot of ability, we shouldn't really be forcing them to do that much deep practice, because we're trying to just get them to get into the process and fall in love with the instrument like the rest of us have. So
yeah, there's some really great points you brought up. Something I noticed, in my own early days of teaching was I'd learn all these really cool ideas and explore deep practice and similar concepts. And that was like the coolest thing in the world to me. But you tell your students, 4 hours of practice, and they'd run the other way. They just wasn't realistic for them. And it's having that realization that not everyone is here to become a shred lord, or not everyone wants to become a virtuoso. Some people just want to sit around the campfire and play acoustic songs. So matching your approach with each individual student so it helps them get to their goal, not necessarily your goal for them, was an important realization for me to come to, and something that since correcting and knowing when to put your foot down on the accelerator with certain students and when to take the scenic route rather than the fast lane has been really, really important for my retention and the enjoyment of our students. But segueing on to another topic, which I'd heard you talk about previously as well, and probably slightly related to deep practice, is this idea of visualization, something that we often hear with sports and high-level athletes. How has that come into your practice and use with students and musicians?
I'm so passionate about visualization. I think it's like the shortcut for everything. But the reason I'm so passionate about it is because it used to make me so angry, visualization, because it's in every business book ever. It's in every like secrets of how to do this kind of thing. It's like, I think it went through this, especially like the last 10 years, it's gone through this like internet marketing cycle of being like the secret that is this. And like, there's these little mechanisms like that just go through cycles of being like, everyone's using it for every program ever. And this is the secret of how you do it. And Tony Robbins famously used it for a long time. And so I think visualization is amazing. I think it becomes a little bit like noise to people. And the problem is, I think that there's some caveats to it. So there's important things about visualization is that one, what is it? And two, how do you do it? So I think when people hear visualization, what they think is having a picture in your mind. And there's the theater of the mind. And there's all these different topics that have come up over the year. And the theater of the mind is from this 1960s book called Psycho-Cybernetics, which is really famous and has been ripped off in lots of other instances ever since then. But basically, there's a problem with it. And I think it's the thing with a little bit of knowledge is dangerous. And also the annoying thing is that for a lot of people that works, and for a lot of people it doesn't work. So I have gone really deep into this because I discovered that one of my teachers, when I was doing visualization stuff with him, and I've always struggled a little bit with visualization, I always did, but I have a teacher who cannot visualize at all, cannot see things in their inner mind. It's a thing called aphantasia, where you literally, there is no image in the head. Like you know the person you were just speaking to intellectually. You can say they were wearing yellow trousers, and that's weird, yellow trousers, but let's say they were wearing yellow. You know they were wearing yellow trousers and a red top, but you cannot picture the yellow trousers and the red top. And then, interesting, I have another teacher who has the opposite, like all the other way on the end of the spectrum, where like if you start talking in images to them, they're gone. They're there in the movie and they can see them and like almost touch them. And so visualization, especially images, is on a spectrum in people's heads. And I would say it's not fixed, but it's a sliding scale of there's only so much, like this person is never going to picture like this, and they can improve it a little bit. And this person can probably move a little bit back and forwards as to how strong their visualizations are. But there's like people's brains do work differently. So, and what I think is most visualization topics just deal with a picture in your mind. Like they instead of talking about how to visualize, they tell you to visualize. And I think that's a mistake, because it's actually a surprisingly large percentage of the population who aren't necessarily unable to visualize. So this is quite extreme, but it's more than you think. Like if you start searching on YouTube for aphantasia, it's really common. Like it's much more common than you think. And this is where visualization loses a lot of people, I think. So I think the important thing that people need to know is you need to be able to understand what are the different parts of visualization. And so I think in music, and this is where my strength is, obviously, is we have three things. We have see, hear, feel. If you think about the goal of when you can play something really, really well, if you've done any gigs ever, and especially if you're a guitar player and you haven't been able to hear your guitar, you know, if you've prepped well enough and you can't hear your guitar, you should know whether what you're playing sounds good because you know your equipment well enough and you know where the frets feel like, whether you can hear your guitar or not. You just feel where the frets are. So I remember I did a gig on bass. We headlined a festival when I was like 15, 16. It was a little festival. It was like 4,000 people. And I couldn't hear my bass. There was no sound coming from my bass. And then stage crew went crazy with dry ice and I couldn't see my bass. I could not see my bass. I could not hear my bass. all I could do was feel the frets. And it wasn't like this wasn't like oh, I just need to look down. You know, sometimes you're looking away and you look down, or it's dark and it's like I couldn't see my hand in front of my face. There was nothing. It was so much dry ice that I couldn't see a thing. And so you have to be able to feel what it's like. So that's the end goal, is like being able to do things. And I think a good analogy for what the end of visualization, the goal we're kind of looking for with music, is if you've ever been to the circus and you've seen a tightrope walker walking at like 100 meters up, they're walking along that tightrope and they're so relaxed. They're smiling. They're just chill. They could have a conversation with you while they're doing it because it's so automatic and they know exactly where everything feels like. And I feel like in music, we don't often practice to that level, and we don't expect that it's going to be effortless when we get there, because it needs to be effortless. But if your life was in your hands up 100 meters, that is how you would practice. You would be doing things until they feel effortless in what you're doing. You'd have that feeling back. So I always think taking people through those three things is the important thing. So can we move people from see to hear only and know whether it's correct when they're working in visualization? So an example of how this can work. And so this is an exercise I think that kind of works for everyone, regardless of where they are on that spectrum. And I call it play. It's like 1-for-1 visualize play. And so whatever the exercise you're working on is, normally if you're working on something where it's complex, it should be a loop of no more than 4 or 5 seconds for us to really be able to be working on it and working stuff out. And you do 1 visualize, 1 play. And that visualize, remember, it's a complex, it's like a mental structure of what it looks like, what it sounds like, and what it feels like. And so for the people who are not able to do what it looks like in their head, they can do what it sounds like normally. Otherwise, they probably wouldn't be doing music. And they can certainly do what it feels like. So it's not like, because someone can't visualize, that it's very unlikely they wouldn't be able to imagine feelings and stuff like, of course they have feelings. I mean, that would be very strange. And so knowing that we're taking it through those three things, you begin to get people really doing it. And so it'll be like, they'll play beginners. It's like, okay, we're going to play 3 chords or your 4 chords or your 2 chords that you're working on. And you're going to play through them once. And then we're going to just take a few seconds to pause here and imagine how it should have been. So where should those fingers have gone? And then we're going to go again. And so it's like 1-for-1, back to back with the visualization. And I find that loop works amazingly well. Like I find people having breakthroughs in 5 minutes that they haven't done in the last like 10 sessions. It's just getting people to a point where they're willing to do that because it seems insane. And the only challenge with it is you never know whether someone's doing it correctly. You never know whether someone's really visualizing or whether they're just pausing for a few seconds. The only control you have as a teacher is going, well, you're going to stop for 5 seconds between every one. And I'm never going to know. But you could just sit there and humor me, or you could do the visualization. The truth is, either way, you're getting better, because either way, you're now going in cold to each round, which is a higher quality of practice. Because when we just do these endless loops of practicing, we're not really getting good at doing the thing that first time well and relaxed. We're just going in, we're getting good at doing a loop. And so I think the 1-for-1 type way of practicing visualize, play is the best thing to reach every single person with visualization in music that I've ever done. And I didn't get this one from anywhere. It's kind of an amalgamation of a bunch of things, but I'm now calling it the Darryl Powis method now, not really. But basically, I think it really works well and it really helps a lot of people. So,
wow, there's like totally amazing stuff there for all the listeners to go and explore. Would you have any recommendations for like books or resources for anyone that does want to follow up on this visualization thing?
Yeah, sure. So The Talent Code is a great book. My dad gave me The Talent Code, weirdly enough. Just was like, oh, I read this a while ago, and gave it to me. And I was like, yeah, whatever, Dad. And I was like, oh, this is insane. And then there's a kind of a recent book that was written by Anders Ericsson, the guy who did the study, which is called Peak, which I think is awesome. a really fantastic book. And it's nice to, like, he's been kind of described by everyone else, all these people writing the books. And it's so cool to like have a book where the guy who did the study is actually talking about it and talking about the things that it's like a phenomenal book. And then another really good one that's really old. It's a little bit different and it doesn't talk about, it's nothing to do with deep practice, but it's like a famous old one. And it's called Effortless Mastery by Kenny Werner. And that's like a classic. It came out in 1996. And it's kind of aimed towards jazz musicians a bit, but it's wicked. It's like the example of the tightrope walker comes from that book. And he uses this great example of how your instrument should be like as simple as using a fork to eat with. Like if a famous person walks in while you're eating dinner, you don't drop your fork. But if a famous person walks in while you were playing a guitar solo, like, would you mess up that guitar solo, or would you play differently and be thinking about them? And it's like, well, probably, yeah. So I think that's a really good, it's kind of pre the studies, so pre-myelin area, which is the kind of science backing this deep practice stuff. So I would say almost effortless mastery is sort of a juxtaposition against it, but I don't think they're contradictory. I think they're just written at different times, and there's great things to learn from each of those books. So
fantastic. So anyone listening can check out those books there. Darryl, we are coming to the end of our time here. I just wanted to, talk about some of the other things that you're doing. So I noticed you've got a new YouTube channel and you've been sort of transitioning into the online space. What kind of sets your channel apart that you're working on and putting that to the world there?
Well, so I've started the YouTube channel. I have been working on my Darryl Powis YouTube channel, which really what I'm doing is I'm putting myself out there as a teacher specifically of fretboard knowledge. So one of the things that I'm really passionate about and really good at, because it was an obsession for me, because I think it annoyed me, is visualization. And so fretboard visualization is like my thing. I struggled with knowing my guitar fretboard really well. And for a long time, like when I was doing those gigs, the reason I would learn everyone's songs so well, and the reason I spend so much time practicing, is because I did not know my notes on the guitar at all. And so I was doing everything by ear, by working out by ear, by listening, slowing things down, and then learning things rote. And it meant that I had to know things really well, because obviously, like when you're doing a gig, the difference between is the next chord on fret 3 or fret 4, that's not a very easy question to answer in the moment, unless you know the song really, really well. But is it a C or a C sharp coming next? Well, that's dramatically different based on the key you're in. And so when I got into visualization, I went deep with visualization. And it's one of the big things that I do for my students now. Like the big transformation that I have is I realized this is really common for a lot of guitar players. We learn songs, we get good at songs, we want to jam songs. And so my big passion is fretboard visualization. It's being able to understand that fretboard and picture it when you're playing the guitar. Because I always learned theory on the piano for all I understood piano. I understood music theory. I passed music theory exams many times as a kid. I could read music, but that didn't make me a better guitar player. And so probably my most passionate thing is being able to think on guitar, imagine guitar, see, hear, feel guitar as you're doing it, and have it really kind of resonate through understanding chord structures and any theory like that. And so my big thing for my YouTube channel is I want to teach people how to do that and kind of impart that same knowledge that I have done with my students and I've done for myself, and help other people to have that same transformation experience.
Fantastic. And, I've checked out a few of Darryl's videos and they're all extremely helpful. And again, I'm quite far along in my guitar playing journey, and there's still some amazing stuff to be learned. So it doesn't matter where you are, whether you're a total beginner, whether you're really far down the track, he's got some amazing stuff. So definitely check it out. Where can everyone follow you in terms of Instagram and your YouTube channel? Just to give yourself a bit of a shout out.
So on YouTube, I'm /Darryl Powis, DarrylPowis. And then the same on Instagram. And on Instagram, I share a lot. I tend to share quite a lot behind the scenes of what we're doing at school, especially in the stories. So my Instagram channel, the pictures are, I update that every now and then. But in the stories, I tend to show what we're doing behind the scenes and picture of events and stuff. So if you're interested in seeing that stuff, then follow me on there and say hi. Yeah, send me a message and say hi. I listen to you on here and all that stuff.
Fantastic. So, Darryl, I've got one final question for you before we wrap it up here today. If you could impart one final piece of wisdom upon the guitarists and music teachers listening to this, what would that be?
Keep going. You'll get better. I really think if it's worth doing, it's worth backing yourself to do and get better over the long period. And so it gets easier. I remember times freaking out about what I was going to teach or spending all day planning lessons, trying to work it out. And you will learn, you will get better. Remember times where we struggled for money, we were struggling to get students in. I remember we had times where we went from having like 20 people contact us a month to having 2 people contact us the next month, and all these nightmares. And so really the only thing that will help you in the long term is sticking at it, because that's the big thing about when you hear the stats of businesses failing. You hear, like, I never remember what they are because I always think they're really negative, but it's like, 1 in 5 make it past X many years. And then of those that make it, only 1 in 10 prevail or something. And what you've got to remember is a lot of that is, one, people just giving up. Sometimes it's people who over leverage themselves, or they did silly things, but a lot of the time it's just people throwing the towel in because they can't be bothered to back themselves anymore. And so this is a great thing to do, because you're getting to do something with music, which is awesome, but also just accept that it's going to be over the long term. And if you back yourself over the long term, there's a space for you. There's a space for you in the industry. You just have to keep working hard and keep doing it. So good luck.
Ladies and gentlemen, there's some fantastic advice there from Darryl. Darryl, thank you so much for joining us for this episode of the Top Music Guitar podcast. You've shared some amazing wisdom and some amazing insights into your teaching, and you've got just such a wealth of knowledge. So thank you for joining us, and we'll look forward until next time, whenever that is.
Thanks, Michael.
All right. Thank you, guys. Have a great time wherever you are in the world, and we'll see you in the next episode of the Top Music Guitar podcast. Thanks for listening. If you enjoy this show and want to hear more of our work, be sure to subscribe to this podcast. For links and resources mentioned in this episode, including a free ebook on how to find more guitar students, visit us at www.topmusic.co/guitar or check out the show notes. And lastly, thanks again for listening, and we'll see you in the next episode.